Okay, good evening, and welcome to the school board work session today. We will start with the call to order. I'm gonna get there. Our mission is to provide an excellent, equitable education in a safe, supportive environment so that all students will succeed and contribute to a diverse and changing society. Sharon, can you call the roll?
Colonel Bondurant.
Here.
Colonel Fisher is expected. Mrs. Sanderson.
Here.
Mr. Rice.
Here.
Mrs. Lambert.
Here.
Ms. McConnell.
Here.
Ms. Marotti.
Here.
Mr. Doran is expected. Mrs. Dominique.
Here.
The board has a quorum.
Thank you, Sharon. Okay, we're here tonight to talk about the Eielson Air Force Base Regional Growth Plan. And I think I'll turn it over to Ms. Terry.
Thank you. All right, so you have lots of documents available to you online in board docs, and also links to information that you've seen in the past. So we'll start out with the memo that I wrote, and I won't read every word of this to you, but basically this is to let you know that we've been engaged in thinking about this process and the bed down of the F-35s for quite some time. In fact, I think I started testifying at stakeholder meetings, 6-7 years ago, right, when everybody was advocating for the F-35. So we're monitoring the impacts on student enrollment. What is the specific concern to the school district is what will be the impact on student enrollment and where might families with children live. We partnered with the Fairbanks North Star Borough to participate in the Regional Growth Plan that was conducted by Agnew, Beck, and Arcadis. In September, the school board received a report from Shelley Wade, who's been the principal researcher in charge of that project. You have a copy of her slides in your packet if you wanted to go back and look at those, and they're also on board docs. So we have taken all of the data provided by Agnew Beck and have done an internal analysis of that work. Key to our welcome. Key to our recommendations to the board is the fact that the baseline population data that everything else is then generated from is Department of Labor projections. So we took a look at, Janet Cobb will walk through some of the data analysis she's done, and Dr. Ott have done, and the graphs associated with that. But the bottom line is that when you look at the Department of Labor population projections over the last 20 years, they indicated a very significant upturn. We have not seen that. In fact, we've seen exactly the opposite. And we based projections going clear back to Dr. Stayrook. We based student projections over time on Department of Labor projections, and they turned out to not be correct. So actually since then, Mike Fisher, when he took over that process, and then Lisa Pierce continued it, and Andy DeGraw will continue it, we've done our own cohort analysis of just what the baseline population of Fairbanks is going to look like. So that's really important. We also looked at student capacity. You guys have seen these charts before if you've usually during budget time, the student capacity of all our schools. And what's important to note when you look at those graphs is that student capacity is based on the Department of Education capacity numbers, and that's the number we stick with. Now, occasionally you'll hear conversation or dialogue about what the real capacity of a school is, and like when we did our K-8 study, we went in and really did an analysis of what the real capacity of a school is. But the number that we're going to use are the deed capacity determinations, because that's what construction was based on, that's what funding for those schools was based on. And when we look at projecting enrollment and whether or not a school will be under or over capacity, those are the numbers we use. So at this time, going down to the second to last and last paragraph in my memo, we have determined that the schools in North Pole and Salcha area and on Eielson Air Force Base can absorb the increased population of students anticipated by the F-35 bed down. at this time, and this is a key point because if we were going to make a determination to build a new school, that was something we'd need to get after right away because, that there's a timeline in there that we'll discuss how long that takes, but it takes a significant amount of time to attempt to get that done. But we do not recommend consideration of new school construction in North Pole. We also do not recommend, as of this time, that the boundaries change next school year. However, we need to do some really tight 2-year projections in terms of student enrollment, and there may be adjustments that need to be made, and it could be, for example, there's a significant amount of construction right now right in the vicinity of North Pole Elementary, and, so it may be that we need to move, one of those boundaries, so sort of those internal boundaries in North Pole might need to be adjusted. At some point, it could be we need to move the Eielson boundary a little bit north. Anyway, so there could be some adjustments that need to be made, but I'm not recommending any for next school year. So with that, we'll walk through the graphs so you can see where these recommendations come from, and I'll turn it over to Janet Cobb, and at any point if you have questions, please stop us and feel free to ask. And again, you should have hard copies of everything in front of you if the board docs or if you find those difficult to read.
So the pages in your packet, they're numbered, so this is page 1. So the F-35 forecast data presented in these graphs comes from the Education and Early Childhood Education section of the Agnew-Beck report. The blue line from the left shows the actual district enrollment leading into the dashed blue line showing a flatline enrollment projection into the future. Then this red line shows the baseline forecast from the report for school-age children, or the forecast without the F-35s, and that's what Dr. Gaborek was talking about, where they're showing just a population increase besides the F-35 addition. And then the green shows the actual forecast for school-age children brought in by the F-35 bed down. And then page 2 shows the same information, but it has the red is the number of students that would be increasing by year, and the green is the additional F-35 students. And just, if I need to stop and ask questions, feel free to stop me.
Just a question on that page 2. The red would be what we would expect as the economy comes up.
Correct.
Is the projection.
Mm-hmm.
And the green is just the F-35 military.
Right.
Okay, so support staff, other civilian job increases will be reflected in the red. Is that correct? If the F-35 impact didn't happen, it would still be the red. That's just from labor statistics, them showing a growth in the borough without the F-35s. The green represents everything related to F-35. Military and non-military.
Everything, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
So history tells us that enrollment forecasts aren't always accurate, as Dr. Gaborek mentioned. This graph represents data gathered back in 2001, and the green line shows the projected enrollment based on Borough and Department of Labor data. The blue line shows our actual enrollment over that time, so you can see it went completely in the opposite direction. And then this page isn't in the packet, but I just took the 2 slides to show the comparison of how this first graph we saw with the red line of the baseline going up, it kind of takes a similar pattern to the 2001 report where they were projecting that we'd have an increase in enrollment, and we didn't. And then page 4, this graph shows 2 variations of the F-35 enrollment projection. There's 100% and a 60%. And this is taking our district projection and adding either 100 or 60% of the F-35 projection only. And we plan to use the 60% forecast toward our district enrollment projections for next year.
Oh, Mr. Dorn, I'm sorry.
Sorry, on page 3, just to go back there for a second, is there any plan for the Department of Labor to readjust or look at why their numbers are quite different than our actual numbers?
Not that we know of. This was just part of their report, of this contracted report. So
Okay.
we didn't, these were right out of that Agnew-Beck report.
Okay.
Thanks.
I think we're on page 5. When considering school capacity, we'll use the 100% of the forecasted F-35 enrollment. This shows the projected additional students by each year broken out by elementary and secondary. And then the next page, this shows the State Department of Education school capacity based on building square footage. And it includes the current enrollment and how many seats are available, and the school square footage, and then what the deed capacity is based on that. So it shows us how many seats are currently available in each of these schools, and they're grouped by North Pole Elementary Schools, and then North Pole area secondary schools, and then the rest of the district, broken out by elementary, middle, and high.
I'm sorry. Just a question. Do we include, or is there a reason we don't include Star of the North Pole campus as part of the capacities for the 7 through 12?
We were pretty much looking at, I don't know why we didn't include Star of the North, but we know what their, I don't know maybe why we didn't include them, but we did add in the Discovery Peak,
Right.
because we know that could have an impact on, meeting the need. If you wanted to know why we didn't include Star of the North.
Star of the North. I know it's only about, about 100 students, but...
Mm-hmm. Again, that's a very specific charter school with a specific mission and their referrals there. So that's something that, potentially could make this, take the edge off some of these numbers. Yeah, it would just be an additional. However, whatever the percentage of the population that comes in, whatever percent of those students go to Star of the North, we would anticipate that percent. You know what I mean? So if it's 2% of the population, 2% might be referred to Star of the North.
Right.
They don't have a lot of additional seats. In fact, I think they're at capacity right now. So
that's what I would assume. But if they weren't there, for some reason they would. I'm just thinking that's a body of students. It's not a lot, but it just.
Yeah, we could find out if they have any available seats right now. If they do, I suspect it's less than 10. So yeah, we could add that to it.
Is the determination that we can provide, or that the schools have capacity for everybody coming in, is that based off of our 60 to 100% model, or is that's not based off the Department of Labor projection, is it? Or just our projection at 60 to 100%?
That is based on the 100% of just the F-35, not the included baseline increase.
So, and I should clarify what we've done there. You go back to one of those graphs. Our projected enrollment, we would suggest as a decrease. I've flatlined it, which might be very optimistic. So I've just flatlined that, and then we've just added that F-35 increase to it. So we're even assuming that we stay status quo without any of this. So that's not been our trend. So
we're flatlining us, and then the F-35 increase is based off the Department of Labor's numbers? Oh, so it's based off our numbers.
Right, and in fact, this is where it's going to get tricky, because I'm not even probably going to flatline projection for next year based on we're 300 students, 309 as of today, students down. Probably if we continue to, let's say none of this were happening, I'm going to guess we'd continue to project a decrease in enrollment, but just for purposes of talking about having this conversation, we've just decided to flatline it. So,
I think the way the numbers worked out were that
since we're 300 students below projection this year, approximately, we would without any, factoring into the F-35s, we'd be projecting, further down next year, but then we'd be adding in that 60% of the F-35 that are coming in. We'll be adding that in, and so it will be more like a flat line from this year to next year because we are anticipating some, coming to us.
Right, but I'm just saying in general, like, let's say none of this were happening. If the F-35 bed down weren't happening, we're seeing a decrease in population, so.
I just have a couple questions about that. So, I noted that our on-post population went down at Arctic Light. I don't know why that is. So before we make assumptions about where the trend is going, are we applying some analysis about why that is, and specific to military populations? In this case, it's me. It's Fort Wainwright population, and what different assumptions are we making than the F-35 regional growth plan is making as the district? Was it on already?
Yeah, and so fluctuating military populations has always been very difficult to wrap our arms around, and so in terms of the overall analysis, I think we've tried to stay pretty neutral in terms of anticipating if there's going to be an increase or decrease. For example, we didn't see that coming. We still projected, the projection that we did for Arctic Light and LAD and Tanana. And again, I don't know if that would change necessarily. I think we just end up sort of adjusting as necessary unless we get really good information about what those swings might look like, which has been difficult to do.
Things I would recommend considering, and again, these are assumptions. So assumptions are things that are valid and necessary for planning purposes. So, F-35 things I don't know about. When does the squadron become operational? When is it deployable? Right? And so if it deploys, families make decisions about where they go if their service member is not with them. Those are things that will affect your projections, and so that may be similar to what we experienced on Fort Wainwright. There's no deployment coming, but they're just going to NTC this year. They're going to the National Training Center, but people will make a decision about how much time do I want to spend away in Alaska without my service member there to bear the burden with me when I could do that where I'm currently stationed.
Networked, yeah.
Right. So just some things because I've talked with Mike Campbell about our reduced numbers this year and trying to get after why that is. I think that's important to have a better understanding, particularly with military population, so that we don't make the wrong assumption about where the trend is going.
Right.
And certainly if we're skewed so far off of the regional growth plan, we would want to affirm why that is, so that the folks that paid for the regional growth plan know why we think that analysis so is off the mark or not correct or what have you. I hope those thoughts make sense.
Is there a way that Fort Wainwright can get projections from MPD, which is Military Personnel Department?
Not in the sense that, not in the at the distance that you're looking for. So the assumption would be my population would remain generally steady over the time unless I had new formations coming to the installation like Colonel Bondurant and the team over Eielson do. So given the fact that there's not any there, my projection could only be like 180 days in. When folks are on assignment to come, I can look at how that's going to fluctuate over the next 6 months. Here are all the gains, here are all the known losses. So I generally know about a third of that population is changing out every year based on this being a 3-year assignment. So we know that we're going to get that turnover. What we don't know is how many kids and how old those kids are until they're very, very close to getting here, and in some cases not until they arrive in terms of the school-age population. The thing that I've asked Mike to look at is the changes in homeschool populations. So are folks making more decisions to homeschool their children by sending them into the school district? And, why that might be. It's a combination of private school choices and homeschool choices, but we're seeing those numbers grow. And, again, it would be useful to ask that question. Don't necessarily have an immediate mechanism to figure that out.
Go ahead.
Mike's
Yeah,
got some data too, so. Okay. Double the last 2 years, yeah. So it doesn't account for the 300 drop, but it accounts for some of it.
Last year we had 347, 400.
Right.
And is there a way, I don't know if that's Colonel Fisher or you, one of you two, is there a way to know, the reason why I'm asking this is because of the office that I work in. It seems that we've had a rise in soldiers getting out of the military, to me, this year. Do you see that being a higher number now?
No.
Okay.
I wouldn't
It's
say
about
that.
the same?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that. I mean, the Army as a whole is trying to grow.
Right.
The Army in Alaska is trying to keep what we have. So, those are retention numbers,
Right.
but, that are folks being allowed to extend up here, they're interested in extending up here, those are all individual decisions that are made over time. There isn't sort of a systemic or policy that says we can only have so many folks here.
Right.
Those are case-by-case decisions that lower level commanders make every day to extend somebody or re-enlist somebody. But I would say that the percentage of folks that are getting out here in Alaska is not statistically significant compared to the rest of the Army.
No, and I would just add one thing. So Dr. Ott worked carefully, I think, after the first draft came out over a year ago. Dr. Ott has been working carefully with Agnew, Beck, and right-sized a bunch of their data and had them do a reanalysis, and I think he did a lot of the reanalysis for them based on what we were actually seeing. And so, again, I think, at some point, you have to base your assumption on something. They went with Department of Data. Department of Labor data, and we're just questioning that. So, yeah, and Janet is more involved in that than I am.
He just pulled that old report up a couple weeks ago. He was just curious looking back in the archives and found that projection that was done by Dr. Stayrook years ago.
Mr. Dorn.
Before we leave the school capacity page, Dr. Burke, you mentioned DED capacity versus real capacity. Just as a reference point, I agree that using the DED is one we should use. But is our real capacity higher or lower than that?
Oh, I think if you talk to, if you walk into a school right now that's converted 3 classrooms to offices for tutors, they would suggest they don't have room for 100 more kids, and I would suggest they do. That doesn't mean we don't need to find a space for, what I mean, office space. And so, again, if we get in a pinch, this district has a history of, not that Mr. Norm would be excited about this, but, using a portable, and sort of having some temporary fixes. Anyway, yeah. So I think again, when we have these conversations, the place where we land, that's a very consistent place, and especially when we think about school construction, is we have to look at the deed capacity, because the state will not even consider an application for new school construction unless you're over capacity as per deed in all the schools in that area. So that's another really important thing to look at when you're pondering new school construction. So.
All right, good. Thank you. That's helpful, because the real could be higher if you think of how you can go closer to the walls in a classroom, assuming there is nothing else built in their way, like a counter or something of this sort. So
or lowered if you want more room for kindergartners. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. The other question I had is, do we have, we don't have the information now, but as we're moving forward, I was thinking of the order, location-wise, that the schools are most likely to be impacted. I mean, we know the Eielson schools are going to be first impacted.
We don't actually
But
know that necessarily.
Okay, then, because of how many housing outside and where likely housing development will be, or...
Yeah, and I think some of that is looking at the rest of the report and where construction is happening. So if you've been out in North Pole recently, there is a significant amount of construction happening right, like in the vicinity of North Pole High School, North Pole Middle, North Pole E. My gut would say that school is going to, and as we work through this, you'll see that I'm not concerned about secondary at all.
Mm-hmm.
So my gut would say North Pole E is going to be impacted first, and we may have to make some adjustments there, and then Colonel Bondurant will be able to explain this. In fact, I'm not even going to attempt to explain it, but as people have the opportunity to move into the housing on base, there's a bit of a cycle that's involved there. So not to say that there won't be significant growth there, but it's not an immediate process. So. Sure, absolutely. Thank you.
There's in housing privatization, we have what's called a waterfall.
Pull your mic back, please.
Yeah, so with privatized housing, we have what's called a waterfall, and it's basically just an order of precedence for folks that live in housing. So active duty military are tier 1, and then we go down from there, and it's all the way down to where you could have members from other services, civilians, and so on. So we anticipate that as active duty Air Force members come to Eielson, a good portion of those will choose to live on base, and that'll create that waterfall where other folks will have to move off base. But what that means is those active duty families with children will likely enroll their children in the schools on base or in the local area. So that's why that vacancy rate in the schools at Eielson is an important fact to note, because we will probably fill that up.
So as an example, there are soldiers that choose to live on Eielson right now because our occupancy rate on the installation at Fort Wainwright is about 97%. I'm not really authorized to waterfall, and neither is Chad, unless the occupancy rate drops below 95, 94, and consistently at that level, because the privatized partners gotta make their money. So if they don't make it from soldiers on Wainwright or airmen on Eielson, then they're allowed to offer that housing option to others that wouldn't ordinarily be. So what does that mean? What does Eielson regional growth mean for Wainwright? It means that the soldiers that live on Eielson will no longer be allowed to, because even though it's military service members, it's airmen first on an Air Force installation. So soldiers will come back to Wainwright or elsewhere. So that's another potential population. I have at least one Army civilian that lives on Eielson. There are others, and I actually don't waterfall at all on Wainwright, but Eielson does, and so you guys currently offer it not just to service members but to civilians as well, and that's to, again, maintain that inventory at a highest occupancy rate possible. So there's going to be some changes coming. Leases will be curtailed, or folks will be told, hey, this is only 12 months. And then once that 12 months up, you got to go find someplace else. So the market will be quite turbulent, I think, between all three, between our two installations and the off-post, off-base community.
I think another important thing to note, when you look at a heat map, which we didn't include, I think there's a link on the website. I'm not remembering, but anyway, where military families live, we've just focused on the North Pole area, but we know that some will live in town. I mean, not everybody's going to live in this particular area. It's certainly not as many, and when you look at in the Agnew-Beck report, the preferences where people want to live, it's closer to the installations, of course, and North Pole is the sort of focus area right now, but there are people who live all over the borough. So, any more questions? Okay, thanks.
Okay, so this next graph shows the dark yellow represents currently enrolled secondary students in the North Pole area schools, while the lighter yellow represents the seats needed from the F-35 forecast, and then the white shows the remaining capacity.
So you can see at the peak of the F-35 increase, there is still over 250 available seats. And this is just for secondary, and then the next slide is for elementary. And then moving on, this shows the projected enrollment over the last 14 years and how it's aligned to the actual enrollment. So even though we do this projection every year, it doesn't always work out for us. Sometimes we're way under, and less frequently we're over projection. And then these next series of graphs are enrollment trend. This first one shows page 10 shows the 15-year trend for Eielson Air Force Base elementary schools. So you can see that downward trend. And then the next one is the enrollment trend for the North Pole area elementary schools. Just stayed a little more static. And then page 12 shows the enrollment trend for the North Pole secondary schools. And then we have students that are military connected in the North Pole Eielson area. Page 14 shows the trend of students with disabilities in the North Pole Eielson area. And the next page gets into some of the funding, and I'm going to turn it over to Andy, Mr. DeGraw.
All right, just want to take a brief look at how the different enrollment projections tie into projected revenue for the school district. This first revenue slide shows 3 columns. The first column is our currently adopted approved budget for the year. So the top line showing enrollment, that was the enrollment projection for last year, and what all of the subsequent revenue numbers lead to from that projection enrollment. The second column is our current, I believe, near end of our 20-day count. So that's more of an actual number, just shy of being finalized. And it shows the corresponding decrease in our state foundation program funding. So roughly about a $2.3 million drop. That's assuming our intensive, special ed intensive student count stays level. And then the other line items, other state revenue, that's TERS and PERS on behalf payments. Local revenue is not tied to enrollment. Federal impact aid is already established for the most part. And then other revenue, that's fund balance budgeted. So roughly a $2.3 million drop based on that enrollment decline. And then the third column would be those same numbers. As Ms. Cobb referenced earlier, we're projecting, we don't have our enrollment projections finalized for the year. However, we anticipate our projections to come in somewhere in line with where we're currently at. The only net change there would be at the bottom. Did it get cut off? It doesn't scroll down at all, does it? Got cut off. My original, the only thing for 2020 different that I'm showing is the added Discovery Peak Charter School, which would be a roughly $2.1 million net drain on revenue. So we would expect revenue to stay roughly static, and then with an additional charter school cost of about $2.1 million. So That's kind of a brief snapshot of our current year as well as estimated revenue for next year. And then the next slide.
Mr. McGraw, your projection for the charter school at 2.1 million, how many students is that?
198 is our current projection.
Thanks.
This slide, this is a fun slide. I had a good time putting this one together. This, and we'll go we won't go year by year, but this just illustrates, again, the same line item revenue sources, and we have two main categories: 100% of F-35 growth, as well as 60% in the bottom group of numbers. And you can probably see this better in your handout, but the main variable here is the state foundation program revenue increasing based on the enrollment increases. So that top number below each year is the estimated enrollment at 100% as well as 60% growth. The assumptions that I've made are that the BSA, the base student allocation in the state funding model, stays level at 5930, assuming a level intensive student count number, and we've assumed a gradual increase in the local contribution, so the borough contribution, and then roughly a 6% increase in federal impact aid, which is between 6 and 7%, which is roughly the increase in students. So, was a chart? Did the chart get cut off on this one? Yeah. This is probably a better view of it, seeing the increase in revenue. It peaks out at around $215 million in 2017, 2018. A similar increase at 60% as well, just slightly lower revenue with slightly lower enrollment.
Mr. Dorn has a question.
Looking at projections, our increase in revenue is based on the enrollment. Have we looked at, or is it in the plan to look at what the increase in cost might be, and whether the increased revenue will cover those costs or not? I have an assumption, a presumption, but
that's the $1 million question right there. Yeah, as right now, we're in pretty much a static revenue environment. And however, costs are increasing despite the fact that revenue is level. So, really, what that results in is the district going through a more intense scrutiny of the budget. And trimming costs and expenses where we can. We would likely see some relief as enrollment starts to increase, but oftentimes, depending on it, so there's a lot of assumptions baked into this cake. And to be honest, those assumptions are conservative in nature. Definitely want to stay on the conservative side of the projections, but yeah, as these numbers play out, I think the pressure will still be on from a budgetary perspective to really sharpen the pencil and to make sure we're running as lean as we can.
So what I'm thinking is it might be worth, I'm sorry, did you want to?
Oh, I was just going to say, even regardless of enrollment fluctuations, we know that status quo funding, which is, sort of regardless of ADM, if the BSA stays status quo, we experience 4% cost increase every year. So that translates to about an $8 million deficit that we start at every single year, all things remaining equal, which is, again, a very simplistic view of the world, but so kind of gets to your question. Every year, if nothing changes, right, we're in an $8 million hole before we even get started. So,
okay. Yeah, and that does get right to it, because I think it's worth having if you want a comparative chart, looking at the revenue it could appear that, well, we're getting more money, so, life should be good. And people forget the cost increases, whether it's, and I would agree, both sides we want to be conservative about, but I think it would be good to have a contrasting or have the revenue and the expense side reflected in some way.
And you'll just be shooting in the dark. And so, like we know, a significant portion of our increases are labor costs. So negotiations will have a big impact on that. That's been running about $3.2 million a year. Just other increases that quickly get us to north of 6 and sometimes close to 8 million.
Right.
So.
Okay, Mr. McGraw. No other questions?
Okay, go ahead.
And that concluded my portion of the presentation.
Perfect timing. Huh?
Thank you. So I think that's the end of this slide deck. Let me just go down and make sure that's the case. So again, there are some assumptions built in here. I think, my feeling is that I was going to go back and you look at one of those graphs. Oh, I just lost it. It's the graph on page. It's page 5. If you look at page 5, whoever has page 5, Janet, do you have control still? Oh. Folks can look at that. It's got the yellow and the blue. So, 2018-19, again, you can see sort of looking at what some of these increases should have been to us. So, we're close to 100 students, or actually 200, student increase there. And, again, we're 300 students down. So, then 2019-20, we're supposed to have another little bit of a bump, and then 2021, significant, and then, up to 2024. So I just feel like we need to keep a really as accurate of a 5-year projection as we can based on what we actually see happening in the community and with student enrollment, a really tight look on the next 2 years. And my feeling is the biggest impact, if we have any, is going to be on school boundaries. I don't see that we need to start positioning for new school construction. I'm just not coming to that conclusion. If we were, Mr. Norum has in the packet a timeline based on past projects of how that works. And so maybe, Mr. Norum, you could just walk through that.
Maybe before we leave this chart, just a quick question. Do we have any sense, and maybe too soon, the F-35 increase this year with the student count, we're seeing an increase there, or?
I don't know if we know.
We aren't seeing an increase this year. We're 300 down, and so that's what makes us a little uneasy when they're predicting, an increase. We haven't really seen it.
Okay. So, and this may be too early, but it may be part of the deep dive you're talking about, looking kind of carefully at it. That I know we're 300 down district-wide, but in the Eielson North Pole area, have we seen an increase there, or are they also down?
I don't think we've really seen an increase anywhere.
Okay. Yeah, I was just saying whether we were getting any, seeing the impact yet of the F-35 in terms of numbers coming in.
I think it'd be really hard to tell. It'd be pretty minimal because there's less than 100 additional positions coming on board in this fiscal year, and they're not. I don't believe that they're all, families. So even if half of them are families, you're only talking about, an additional 20 or 30 students potentially. You probably wouldn't notice that impact.
Yeah, and I think, again, we'll just, when we get our final October count, we'll just have to really watch the North Pole area schools. And if, again, to your point, if everybody else is decreasing but they're staying static, we know that we're seeing some impact there, right? So I think we're just going to have to watch those North Pole schools and keep a close eye on that. So.
And then my other question was, I've been trying to remember coming down here, and my memory is not accurate. Was it 5, 6 years ago, we were looking at some boundary changes with North Pole Schools, and I thought we moved some neighborhoods north, but I know there was a discussion and plan for that. I don't remember whether we actually did it or not, and it might have been 6 to 8 years.
The last one we did, we did do some changes. I want to say it was, wait, was it? What's that, Ryan would know? No, it was when Dave Faree was still here. That was the last. It was before Ryan.
I think he's aware of the last boundaries now.
Yeah.
There were some changes.
Yeah, it was right before Dave Norum came on, right?
Yeah.
And that was the last shift because
It was one of
University
the last
Park,
things that Dave Faree did.
Yeah.
Okay. I thought
There were some students out that way that came in toward town, some towards Hunter, some towards Joy. I know that there were some boundary shifts right around MSN. It affected Tick Brown, North Pole E, MSN.
Okay. All right. That's what I generally remembered. Yeah. I couldn't remember if we actually wound up doing. I thought we had. But
The good news is that our new transportation software has the ability to map that and do, what-if scenarios. So that'll be a easier job for us than it has been in the past.
I think the important piece there, and that's the reason for as solid of a 2-year projection as we can get, is we spent at least a year preparing the community for those, school boundary changes. So that's not something you just turn on a dime on either. So.
2008. I was on the
was it?
committee.
So
for
10
that.
years ago. Okay.
So, because I was on the committee for that, because I was with
Gotcha. Thank you.
Sorry. And then I think it was right the next year. That's when we started changing the boundary lines.
So close to
Nobody
10.
likes boundary changes. They like new schools, but nobody wants to move. So.
But I do remember the schools really did a tremendous job in inviting the new families and orienting and talking about it and stuff. So, okay, thank you for refreshing my memory.
So again, just in case, again, construction were to be a conversation, I just wanted Dave to give you an outline so you could kind of see what that would look like. Again, a lot of assumptions in terms of.
At one time we had gone through sort of this scenario, and there's a site out in the Badger Road area that the borough owns that's sort of been set aside for a school site. And so these timetables, are built around the fact that the site's already chosen. If that doesn't happen to be the site, there's a lot of time that goes into finding a site that is reasonable to build a school. But the school board would have to pass a resolution to build a new school. The resolution would have to be brought to the borough no later than July to be ready for a question on the ballot in October. If the voters approved to bond for a new school, it would take some time, to go through the process of, meeting with the stakeholders, creating the ed specs, finding the architects, the engineers. There's about 3 months there. In February, if they selected an architect, the design, would take close to 9 months or so to go through that process. Then you've got the bid process, put out the request for proposals and what have you. If you awarded the bid in February, that would give time to get the job going by the time summer came along. Typically, it's longer than a year to get that process done, get the school ready to go. And so, you'd be talking August of 2023 if you started, in May of 2020.
Yes, Mr. Norton.
Am I correct, Mr. Norm, that we have, as a district, we own 2 building designs? I'll use the and there's several building variations of that.
Prototypical
and
schools.
The prototypicals, that's right, the prototypes, that one, and the Denali Nordale prototype?
Yeah, I mean, essentially any school that we've built, we've got plans for, and a lot of those schools, the prototypical school, the idea was that if you build more of them, you can save money in design. Nordale and Denali are the same design. Pearl Creek and Weller are the same design. We've got about 6 or 7 of the Ann Ween designs, Crawford, Ladd, Arctic Light. There's a bunch of those. So you're right.
And I know it doesn't necessarily cut the time down, because even if you use the prototypical, you're looking to see over time what adjustments might need to be made, or within a particular community as well. But
that, along with the fact that if you're, I don't believe that you'd get one of those ready in 3 months, no matter what you did.
Right.
You miss the construction season, and then you're into the next year.
Thank you.
Any questions on Mr. Norm's presentation?
So there's other, again, documents in here and other links in board docs, just in case you wanted those. I guess if the board wants any conversation, my recommendation is just hold for now. I'm not seeing the need for any drastic changes right now, and just keep closely tracking what's happening and what's going on. So I don't know if Colonel Bondurant has any other thoughts there.
So I do. I think the things we've talked about tonight are, we have a reasonable idea of the number of students that are coming in, but it's really order of magnitude, and it's really difficult to predict, right? But we've looked at the capacity that we have, and I think based on the numbers that we've got and the best information we have, we're pretty comfortable that we've got capacity. But one of the things you and I talked about this past summer was it could be a transportation issue, right? Distribution issue. So while we do have pretty good capacity in the area that we most likely anticipate these students are going to come in, there could be still some potential to have to move some folks around. So what I think we ought to be talking about is process. Like, how far in advance can we anticipate and get some good numbers on folks coming in, right? And we do in the military have a process for doing that. We know what our inbounds are at a reasonable amount of time. We need to be able to reach out to those families and try to get the best information we can as far as, do you have students that you're planning to enroll in the schools? What are their ages and that type of thing? So we have a good idea of which level of school that they're going to be going into. And then how flexible are we and in what amount of time to redistribute the students or the teachers or whatever those second and third order effects are that we have to deal with when an unanticipated population comes into the school, right? Do we have to move teachers around? Do we have to change bus schedules or whatever, and start looking at those processes? Because I think what we know is we're not going to know the exact numbers. So what are the processes that we can start looking at that we have the ability to affect and influence, and how quickly can we do that?
I would think one thing that we would continue to do that we started a couple years ago is add teachers in reserve specifically for Eielson, the Eielson schools. When we were anticipating more of a spike, and I think we actually used 2 of those teachers 2 years ago. This year, again, all schools being down, we ended up not needing any of that. I feel like we have a pretty good mechanism in August for moving teachers prior to school starting, and where we'll have to just adjust as if like in October. And you kind of outlined what those periods of time, where folks, moving in and out would be, so if we have to hire teachers mid-year to make some of these adjustments, I think we just need to be positioned for that. Also, another really interesting piece of information I just heard today was we have already opened up the Eielson schools so that out of attendance area, students have, if their families are driving on to Eielson Air Force Base, they can take their kids there, and so we've been encouraging that, and trying to make it easy for folks. We have I'm really curious about this number, but it sounds like over 100 students at the high school, at the junior, senior high school, who are out of attendance area, which is really surprising to me. So we knew we had families taking advantage of it at the elementary level. I'm surprised at that high school, that senior high number. So some of that displacement, you know what I mean? There might be some of those displacement issues. So
Colonel Bondurant, I've watched some movements of where we expected a large influx to a school, and I don't know exactly how the military works at this point, where at a certain point you know the people who are coming, and you can get family makeup and that type of thing and sort of the best projections based on that. And then time goes on and those individuals change, and so the makeup of those families change. Or if there's a delay by a month or two of when we expected, then people drop off. I don't know whether they would get reassigned other places. Once you get your numbers, how stable do they tend to stay, if you know?
So the numbers themselves stay fairly stable, if that's what you mean, like the manning documents, right? The number of folks that are coming in. But relevant to this conversation, the hard thing to do is to predict, is a master sergeant going to be a single male or female, or are they going to be married with 5 kids, right? That's more relevant to what we're worried about, because that's just going to fill up the schools. And that's something we don't have any control over. And that demographic is so random and it has nothing to do with age or rank, honestly. I mean, you can have a young airman that has a large family and a, senior NCO or officer that's single and doesn't have any children, or vice versa. So,
and once somebody is assigned to be transferred here, what's the likelihood of that transfer being changed? So I mean, if I'm coming to you and I've got 2 kids of school age, once you know that I'm coming, is that unlikely to change, or does
It's relatively stable. I mean, yes, orders get canceled from time to time. I mean, things do happen like that where you're expecting somebody and somebody else comes, but I would say that's the exception. With a fairly high predictability, I think if the person gets the assignment, that's typically the person that's coming. We do have some challenges with folks that because of there's not as robust medical care and different services in the area, so folks with certain conditions may not be qualified to come. We do have a higher rate of that, actually, than some other locations, but I think for the most part it's fairly predictable.
So, and Tim, just to validate what Colonel Bondurant is saying, the assignment process is you get your assignment, and then you have to prepare for that assignment, and part of that preparation is determining, your suitability to physically be in that duty location. So because it's Alaska, you have to essentially be command sponsored to come here to bring your family. So to assume that the service member definitely can come, because it's assumed they can make it to Alaska because they're fit for duty, what have you, but the family members don't necessarily have to come, and this is true for all overseas assignments. In Alaska is considered an overseas assignment, as is Hawaii. So the family members go through an overseas screening process, and then, as Colonel Bondurant just mentioned, some of them may have special care requirements that we have to make sure not just can that care be met, but can that care be met with the quantity that's required across the base's population or the post population on Wainwright or Eielson specific or in the community. So what we don't want to do is bring people here and say, oh, there's a pediatrician here, but then there's not enough pediatricians. And so there's that process, and sometimes that will change someone's orders fairly late in the game. So you could be within 90 days of reporting and you don't actually get your orders. You get your assignment instructions, but nothing comes of it because you didn't pass that screening process. How I got here is exactly a result of the person that was supposed to come to Wainwright not being able to do that. So that's not rank specific, it's not age specific, and I think some of the paradigms that we've been used to assuming on ages and ranks and the ages of children, you can't assume that anymore. Senior people have really young kids. We've been deployed a lot. So when you're not home, right, so that's part of the dynamic. And you know, I went from an installation coming here that was all senior people, and you would be shocked at the number of elementary and early childhood education age kids for colonels and lieutenant colonels. That was crazy, the number of small kids. We were the exception. We had kids going into college, and there weren't a whole lot of peers of them for them. So just back to your original question is things can change. I believe it's relatively minor in the grand scheme of things. If that person can't make the assignment, the next person will. So if that's I think how it all washes out is that, hey, look, if you don't clear that setup, if you can't clear your assignment to Alaska, the Army will go and find another person to come to Alaska that can clear the requirement with their family members. So it all washes out in the end, I think.
Thank you. Already?
Bear with me.
Am I getting close?
There we go. Yeah, that was a lot closer. Colonel Fisher, can you clarify earlier when you mentioned that there was a reduction in enrollments on Fort Wainwright, and that could be connected to either deployment or homeschooling?
Well, what Mike and I think, at least this year, is that it's indicative of an increased homeschool population for those that live at Fort Wainwright. So I think you do allow out-of-area attendance for Arctic Light, or folks could do that, but we don't see much of that. I think that was because of K-8 expansion. So I don't know what the results of K-8 did to Arctic Light's older kids there, but so we think it's more homeschool related than the number of kids that are assigned to Wainwright. We can't really tell you that, but that's to the best data we have, because in some cases you don't have to report if you homeschool your child, so it's hard for us to ascertain where the kids went, if that makes any sense.
Now, does Fort Wainwright have their own specific homeschool program? Or when you say homeschooling, they're going to homeschools in this area or out of this area? You don't know?
We don't know, but
okay.
I mean, so homeschoolers could register with the school district. They don't have to, so they could be following some program from wherever they came from or just their own program. And I would tell you, as a trend, across the military, homeschooling is an increasingly popular option because of the portability that we have to have, and the classes that you're taking here don't get accepted somewhere else, particularly for the high school ages. So that's a factor. It's not the only factor.
Ms. Moyer, I'm sorry.
Oh, yep. Sorry. What I was getting at was, I think earlier you mentioned that when parents are deployed, then the other parent has the choice to leave, which could impact the enrollment. So then my question is to Colonel Bondurant. I don't know if you're allowed to tell us, but do you foresee any initial deployments in that time that we're trying to look at that could affect the enrollment in that way?
No, I don't anticipate that soon. It'll take a while for us to get those new squadrons in and up and operational. And then even then, it's hard to say who would decide to stay and who would decide to go. It's just a very difficult thing to predict. I agree with Colonel Fisher that does factor into people's calculus, but it'll be a while before we actually see those squadrons deploying.
Board was next, and then you, Mr. Dorr.
Thank you. I was just going to say, I think it was 4 years ago we had a homeschool study contracted and looked at some of those numbers. The specific purpose at that time was to grow our BEST program. And so it might be, again, in sort of light of all this, have another study done and get updated numbers and see what that looks like. I don't remember the exact. There were a significant number of quote-unquote undocumented homeschool families. And again, they don't have to report, like you said, so that's a bit of a squishy number to get a hold of. But yeah, I'll put that on the list for something to look at again.
I didn't see in the regional plan reports, and somebody here might know or put on the tickler list. They project about 4,200 jobs to be connected to the F-35s. And I was looking to see whether there was any indication of how many jobs that would attract people even from the Fairbanks area to move out to the North Pole Eielson area to be closer to their work, and how that might impact when we talk about housing needs, et cetera. And I don't know if that was factored in, if we know, or at least something to maybe keep in mind as we go down the road on this.
Yeah, I'm trying to, there's so many conversations. I don't remember a specific study. I mean, there's certainly, so there was jobs related to construction and build-up, and then service, related jobs that, would have more longevity. And the conversation more was about how, there's a really interesting graph in there in the study. I think Shelley had it in her slides of, current acceptable housing, where they were on track, for construction, and then there was like a gap of 185, and Bryce, Mayor Ward at the time of North Pole, was feeling like the North Pole construction industry could fill that extra gap. I don't know if that accounted for any out-migration from Fairbanks, though, if it was more just related.
Were those numbers labor numbers as well? Been inflated too?
I think the housing numbers are actually pretty hard data in terms of what they did a pretty good analysis of the current housing situation in the borough and sort of stratified that according to, sort of from your dry cabin to, the whole range of what we have in terms of options in Fairbanks. So, yeah.
But as far as the parents and students coming here, I was one of those parents years ago, 30 years ago. I never wanted to come to Alaska, and I've been here 30 years since. The reason I came was because of a ring. I can't even wear that ring anymore. My husband promised I will only be here 3 years. So we need to get those soldiers into thinking that they can get their spouses to come if they offer something for them to come here for. And my kids never wanted to come. So it's one of those places when you come to Alaska, you hear all these horrible things about Alaska. But if there's some way to get the message out to them that it's not that bad of a place to come, I think we can get an abundance of kids. But your high school kids, that's a tough one to sell. So it's a tough job, but somebody's got to do it, I guess.
I would just say one thing from our conversation this summer about really, with Colonel Bondurant and I had this summer about really highlighting the schools on base and all of our schools, but the schools on base in terms of making living on the installation attractive to families. What came out of that actually was a forward-facing military family page, and again, listing those schools and test scores and just things to really attract folks on base, and then anyway also just to help with transition in general. So I know that's on Heather's list in terms of putting something like that together, especially as we see when the peak is coming. So I don't know, I haven't talked to her recently what that might look like, but on the list for sure.
Anything else anyone wants to bring up about the Eielson growth plan? Nothing? Maybe we can get out early, huh?
Thank you so much for you guys for coming.
thank you
Really
all.
appreciate you being here. And I guess I would just say we'll just keep the conversation open, and as we get information, and if Janet and whoever your designee, if it's whoever it is, just stay in close contact about some of those fluctuations, because she and Andy are the most closely involved with our projections. So whatever you see something start to pop, let us know. So thank you. Yeah.
So thank you all. Where we go on my sheet next year? We just go into the school board resolutions? Okay. You all, I mean, if Dr. Goodberg said you guys can leave, you can leave. But we're going to go into our school board resolutions. And our goals, core value is student-centered. Everything we do is students and student learning. Dr. Goodberg will provide an overview of the board's resolutions, approval process, and suggestions to improve communications and engagement with board resolutions. And does everybody have the resolutions?
I think it should be at the
Yes, in the packet.
At the back of the packet. So. Okay, so this has been an ongoing conversation. You should have operating procedures in the agenda. And let's see, I'm going to have to find my stuff here.
Board meetings.
You'll have school board resolutions from 2000 to the present. I don't know if I have the operating procedures here. Oh, yeah, okay, it's on that first page. So the conversation around resolutions has been, especially when we had a new resolution that came up that the board considered at the last meeting, the conversation has been, is there something that we can do to make our school board resolutions and the ones that we're going to pass for the year more predictable? And so there's been talk about grouping them all together and deciding at the beginning of the year what resolutions the board would pass, and then passing those. And one reason that is a suggestion that would be interesting to administration is when you look at the communication development and engagement recognition calendar. So we're really trying to tighten up our recognition calendar. There's a day for everything, and so if you celebrate all the days that there are for everything, you just stop, and then because it's completely impossible to do, and then you are missing somebody. So we have been trying to tighten up. In fact, we haven't even released a calendar of recognition days this year because we're trying to really tighten those up and align them with resolutions that exist. And then also, you'll see Lights On After School. I guess that is a resolution, actually. Red Ribbon Week. And so you can see there's all kinds of different. So in November 1st through the 5th, there are so many different job classifications within ESSA, and that's our Support Staff Association, right? And so we're going to celebrate ESSA Appreciation Week as a district for all ESSA employees in November, and then we have a similar FPA, Principals Appreciation Week, in April. And again, these align, to some degree with classifications in those jobs. May has always been National Teacher Appreciation Week. But again, there's teacher appreciation days of different types all over the calendar. So anyway, a piece of feedback would be to the board to consider, and maybe it would be something for next fall or maybe for the rest of the school year, is determine what resolutions you want to pass them all at the beginning of the school year. We can get them out to schools, and then we also publish this, and then if we need to make sure that we have resources available, from teaching and learning or things like that, we can point people to those resources. So the other part of the conversation is just again some conversation about what it means to pass a resolution. So when we pass a resolution that's already in existence, there's really different interpretations and questions about what that means. So depending on who you are, you view those resolutions differently. So some people view a resolution as a call to action. and they expect something very tangible to be happening on the ground in the classroom. And that is not necessarily the case. So, for example, what's a good one? Indigenous Peoples Day, that might be an example. An elementary school teacher, might tell you, look, we, all throughout the curriculum, we are attempting to celebrate Indigenous peoples. We don't just do it on October 8th. And so, libraries and, school posters and things, they'll try to do things, around those particular days, but celebrating Indigenous people is not something that just happens on one day in the schools on the ground. So a great example of this is the resolution that we just passed on, the LGBTQ resolution. You heard the buzz, or if you were paying attention to social media, I don't want to overstate it, a fair number of questions about what's going to change in my classroom. And so, for example, Kate LaPlante fielded a phone call from a parent who said, well, if you're going to start teaching about some of these things, I better pull my kid out for the month of October. And so, trying to explain that it's really not going to change what happens in the classroom, and specifically with that resolution, as it is age appropriate, these topics are addressed, right? And so it's very different in a high school history class or a high school health class than it is in kindergarten. And so anyway, so just some of those, it's just a conversation that keeps coming up. I think every time we have a new resolution, there tends to be some frustration around it in terms of the group that wants the new resolution, whether it be regional student council or the diversity committee or another community group or another district group, and then the board just struggling with do we want another resolution? Do we just keep passing new resolutions? Can we tighten up resolutions? So anyway, conversation about resolutions.
Well, I guess I could get the conversation started about the last one. I wasn't here for the passing of it, but I got a lot of phone calls. Even my daughter-in-law that works at Arctic Light School, people were telling her that I need to change it and it shouldn't be. And I think people need to read what it is that we're doing, first of all. A lot of times they'll just see, and this says recognizing. It doesn't say honoring like the other resolutions do. Most of them do anyway. And I would really caution the board as a whole that when we do put out a resolution, people would read it through. And we did several changes on it from when it first came out until the day that it was presented to the board to agree on it, for people to come and give us comments of the wording that they would like to see in it, or what is it really all about. And once people started to read it, at least I was told, because I had several of them call me back and say, oh, okay, I guess this is all right. We're not going to force teachers to teach it in the classrooms, and, if a question comes up about it, teachers will know how to handle it. So some people got it, some people didn't. But it goes back to the old saying, sometimes you can please some of the people, but you can't please all the people all the time. So I thought it was handled very well when this one came out, though. I didn't think it was going to be that big of a conversation piece as it was. I knew it was going to be a conversation piece, but not that huge of a conversation piece. So I really thought it was handled very well. I think we should have resolutions. And I think the reason behind a lot of resolutions is to show communities that we appreciate all kinds, all faces, all types, and we respect people's different religions and heritage. I think my little 10 cent word.
Yeah, no, I think languages that we've been using as if teachers ask, especially when a new resolution comes out like the one that just did, we talk about, this is the district and the board naming a value that we have, right? We have a value, and in that particular one, inclusion of all of our students and recognizing that we serve all our students, and you guys were there for the conversation, so you know what it was. So I think, yeah, it's just a Again, it's something that comes up, it seems like, about every year, about how are we going to handle resolutions and do we need to do anything differently. Again, I can tell you the calendar, I think, there's been so much different history in terms of resolutions the board has and hasn't passed. Some of the lists are long, some of them are short. We've kind of identified the ones that seem to be important to the board right now and are just, going to be gearing up for those in terms of, this will probably be our recognition calendar that we publish and say, hey, these things are coming, be aware of those. So. And then from a district perspective, this is what we will focus on in terms of, sort of forward-facing, celebrating, some of these different things. So,
Ms. McConnell, Mr. Dorn, and Ms. Sanderson. I hope I got everybody.
Well, I don't want to get us too structured, to do things just way beforehand. That resolution, I'm on the diversity committee, and Mr. Dorn came and worked with us on that resolution. It was because of timing, and unfortunately I wasn't at the last board meeting. I was in Anchorage that week for AFN, so I got comments also about it, but I think it was important to our committee that resolution be adopted, because we want to make sure in the school year that the students realize no matter who they are, they can feel safe in our district and they can be acknowledged for who they are. We talked about suicide rates of people, of our students, just because of who they are, and we really wanted to make them feel safe, and that was the main gist of it. Unfortunately, the timing was an issue because October was the time to recognize this group, or we could wait till June, and school's out in June, so we couldn't do it then. So that's why we brought it forward when we did, and, I'm kind of wondering why, this is all because of that one resolution. It's unfortunate. That's what the gist I'm getting. I don't want to get so structured and organized that we make people feel, whether they're on a committee, that they can't bring something forward because, of timing. I think that was the whole issue with that one was timing, and that's why we brought it forward so quickly. I can understand the concern of the faculty, the teachers wondering, well, what are we going to do? What do we have to do? But this is very important that we recognize all our students, so I appreciate this, but again, I don't want to get us in such a structured state of having to do things, I think if there's something that does come up, and I don't think it will, I've been on the board for 4 terms, and I think this is one of the very first times that we've had a resolution come forward that quickly, just because of timing. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Ms. McConnell. Mr. Dorn.
A couple things. What does CDE stand for?
Communications, Development, and Engagement.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Yeah, I think that one of the things was, as we look at these, there's sometimes whether some resolutions need to be done every single year or over a period of time have they been recognized. But what they meant, I think the message that's most important is, do they mean something to our community? And if that's what it is, then it doesn't matter. It doesn't really normally take that much time for us to do a resolution. And I agree that we want to do, when they are done, if we do them, a whole group like at one time or in the beginning of the year, even though many of the things we recognize are important throughout the year, and the expectation is that, for a lot of these, it is addressed throughout the year in different ways by teachers and parents and kids. But by doing them in closer proximity to a specific recognition, is that it brings it to the fore, and it's just not something that, okay, we got all of those done and we're ready to go, but it does bring it back and gives us a reflective piece to say, oh yeah, how does this play if I'm a teacher in the school, the principal, or whatever, or for kids or for the community at large to think about. So I do want to, and I think you're right. We need to keep, certainly a guideline, and it's nice to know what's coming. But there may be issues that we need to address that are even not just recognitions. There are issues perhaps in the state or something like this. And as you look over, this was a great list, by the way. I want to say thank you to staff, whoever put it together, to see over the,
Sure. Yeah, Sharon keeps the history.
The amount of time from 2000 to now. It's really good to see
You would have went back further if you
what
asked.
we've done. So thank you very much.
Yeah, no, you could have. She sure could have. Ms. Anderson?
Yes, I wanted to say that whenever we have resolutions or whatever it is that we're celebrating in the district, one of the things we can always look at it as an opportunity to showcase what we're doing in our district, what our staff, students, and what particular schools are doing, and keep that updated on the website so that people get another perspective and instead of what else do we have to do. But it's a time of recognizing that we're a very diverse community and it plays into what we do, part of the strategic plan and the things that we're working towards. So I'm excited to see the ESSA. Just have to break that out so that people know it's not the Every Child Succeeds program. It was ESSA number 1 and ESSA number 2. So, but I'm happy to see that on there. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Yes, Ms. Eielson.
I like the resolutions as they are. I can see some of the, some staff wanting some prior notice, like if they are really wanting to do certain things, and then knowing that at the beginning of the year they can start working on the different, whatever it is that they're working on in class, that they can start that earlier. So I guess one of the things you could do is we can just do the resolutions as they are. You put out this CDC recognition calendar if you wanted at the beginning of the year, maybe put a list of the normal resolutions that are out and when they would, what months that they would normally occur, so that if they want a prior plan, they can start doing that earlier, and then of course we would then pass them, 2 weeks or a month before, whatever that was, so that they would at least know that they're coming and they can plan if they wanted to do something a little bit more than just a 2-week notice. Or just a suggestion.
Yeah, no, I think this is the list actually that we're going to. We were just waiting to till we had this work session to. Anyway, I think this is the list that we're going to. The new recognition list that we're going to publish. A great example of where it's where, and again, so it's always at the purview of the board president, but a great example of one that came up is, FPA Appreciation Week in April, but I believe there was a request for FPA resolution or Principals Day resolution in October. So, so then it's like, well, yeah. So it's a conversation that happens every time a request comes in, and so is it, so again, so when are we celebrating principals? That, then that's, I think, when people start to, okay, so when are we celebrating principals? Are we celebrating principals in October or April, or are we doing both? And does it really matter? So I think we'll, again, just because we have these weeks, I'm just thinking through this, let's say we did pass a principals resolution in October, so we'd probably pass that out, but as a district, we will be pushing ESSA appreciation in November, principal appreciation in April, and teacher appreciation in May, right? And we'll have these focused week time periods where we celebrate our those 3 of the 4 employee groups. So, yeah. So it's just an interesting conversation that happens when a request for a resolution pops up.
Well, I kind of think I'm just speaking off of looking at this tonight, because I wanted to get an understanding of why we had the 2 separate sheets like we do. But I think we need to add back October for the LGBTQ.
Oh, yeah, we'll put it. It hadn't been passed.
It hadn't been passed when we drafted this. This was not
okay.
This was so. Please don't think that this was in reaction to anything. So we worked on this over the summer, just trying to not be reactive, trying to plan ahead for what was coming. So we drafted this in, I think, July or August, and so it has not been updated with the most recent. But that doesn't mean that we didn't take action. We reacted when the board passed that resolution. We changed the Facebook header. We put things up on social media. So the fact that it wasn't listed didn't mean we didn't respond to and provide communication to support that board resolution. But these are the ones that we looked at and tried to kind of streamline so that we'd be able to prepare content and really prepare thoughtful content. I don't know if you saw what we did for on social media for it's the funny date one that's from mid-September to mid-October, the Hispanic American
Hispanic Heritage Month.
Hispanic Heritage, thank you. Because it's not just the month of February. It's always from the middle of the month to the middle of the month. So we had, we didn't have any content from prior school years, of our students. So we collected information, spotlighting specific people, just trying to provide something meaningful that would, that would generate some social media interest in and deepen the understanding of what we were, what that month was all about. So where there's a national resource to pull from, as there was in that case, we did that, but we created all those pieces of, looking at specific people and doing kind of like little bios. And I think we did something similar last year with, in February for Black History Month. So we're trying to generate content if we can plan ahead as much as we can plan ahead. That's what we were doing. And then also as far as the teachers saying, okay, if this is when we know they're doing that, for example, Lights On After School, let's see if we can get them to send us some content of what they're doing for that event so that we can share that. So it's just a planning tool for us, really.
Bryce?
So my thing, and maybe I've read this wrong, and so, I'm just going to ask for clarification. This is just something that we're going to be putting up, and so it's going to be a reference point, but we're still going to be able to make the resolutions, at the time that we usually do it, because I feel that if we do it at one shot, it's going to water down everything that we're trying to go through.
That was just one suggestion from somebody, was that it be done at the beginning of the month. This is again with a couple tweaks that we need to make, but with a couple tweaks, this is what we put together for the summer, this summer to publish as our district celebration calendar. So we always send out a calendar, and so just trying to tie that with resolutions and other things that don't necessarily have resolutions but that are happening. So.
Okay.
Sorry, Mr. Dorn.
I like the idea. I'm thinking back as a principal. Getting a calendar, like a recognition calendar or something. What are the highlights coming up throughout the year, and and it's kind of a nice type of thing. And as Mr. Rice said, making sure we can do the resolutions in the time frame that makes sense for them in proximity. It did catch my eye in terms of the FPA appreciation in April. One thing is, I think once a year is enough. I was interested why April, and I've been going through what's going on in April, because National Principal Month is October. And there are lots of things that happen in October, and kind of spacing things out, I don't have a problem with. But, we as we look at them, what's the various connections, like Teacher Appreciation Week is in May with the National Teacher Appreciation Week, which is great. And we have the different things that fit. And it also crossed my mind that
sorry.
I'm sorry.
NASSP and ASSP and AESP, April, that month in April is when they celebrate it. Yes, that's where it starts to get tricky. Okay. So you have the two professional organizations. The secondary and elementary principal organizations celebrate the week of April 8th, but then there's a National Principals Day and other things in October. So again, that's always the thing.
Okay. So we just have to make sure secondary follows elementary. And
we went with the national organizations, yeah.
Okay, so but once a year, I would definitely say. But what crossed my mind too is that whether there are ways that we can grab the concepts, the important concepts of some of them, and I'm not being being male at this point. you know, I hesitate when I look at Women's History Month and International Women's Day. Can we kind of do some blending together or something like that? No, okay. That's okay. I'm willing to right away go. You know, but when we have Men's History Month where we can combine them, you can throw anything in there. I don't care. Yeah, but my point is just in terms of looking at some of the pieces where there might be a day recognition within a month recognition that, you know, could be worked in the same one, you know, and actually connect things together for people.
No, that would be a perfect example of wanting to combine those. So.
November 19th is International Men's Day.
All right. I don't know why.
But I see we have a school bus driver appreciation. That's new, isn't it?
Yeah, it's been around for quite a number of years.
I don't remember us.
Yeah.
It's on
so
a
again,
Saturday.
another.
I see it's on a Saturday, but I think that's great though to appreciate them.
Yeah, and I forget when that was. If I read back through, thank you, Sharon, I could find out exactly where that first one was done. But schools have done a tremendous job and continue to do that to recognize bus drivers. Yeah,
should be on a Friday though, I think.
Might need to decide a different day for.
Maybe the first Friday.
Yeah, and actually the school said what works for most of the bus drivers to, because some of their schedules, they work to make sure it gets their drivers. Yeah, they do.
Call the roll on this year for this one?
No, it was just a matter of discussion again. It's something that we had a work session on resolutions 2 years ago, and it just constantly comes up as a question. So we thought we'd bring it forward again, and so we'll edit our recognition calendar and get that out, and then just let resolutions roll as they roll.
No one else had anything, right? Okay, so are we moving on to the other policy, the 272-1 operating procedures?
Oh, I think that was related. I think we're set. I don't think we need any changes there.
They're just references to this one.
Just to help.
All you guys. Wow, 7:30. 7:40. Might like to be in this position. Give them a scare anyway. Any other comments? Any information? We can go around and ask board members if they have anything. Ms. McConnell?
Nothing.
Ms. Moriarty? See, I'm going to work with that. Mr. Doran?
I'm good, thanks.
Ms. Anderson? And Ms. Lambert? Rice? All righty. Well, I guess I'll call for the...
Second.
All righty, we are adjourned.